Breaking news out of England. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, has been involved in a car accident.
Sometimes all it takes is a hairline fracture in the glass for even the strongest structure to begin collapsing. The 2019 car crash that almost cost Prince Philip his life was officially dismissed as nothing more than a minor incident. Yet when he died 2 years later, on what appeared to be a calm, ordinary morning at Windsor, old murmurs resurfaced. Quiet conversations revived memories of that night in Norfolk, a discreet retrieval, the strained quiet between father and son. Gradually, public doubt took shape. Was it possible that Prince Andrew had played a role in his father's demise? But as suspicion grew, another name began circulating in hushed private exchanges: Camilla. No accusations were spoken aloud. No evidence surfaced. Still, fragments of information, elusive clues, and unsettling coincidences slowly converged, leading to a question few were brave enough to ask. If someone had been pulling the strings from the shadows, could she have been concealed behind the flawless image of a devoted queen consort? And standing quietly between all of this was me, an overlooked observer, a Privy Council member seated at the edges of royal gatherings, present but unnoticed, watching carefully as others chose to look away. Because the truth never truly vanishes. It lingers, waiting patiently for the right instant to emerge, like a dark stain that no amount of washing can erase. January 17th, 2019 dawned beneath skies the color of soot across eastern England. Early that morning, breaking news from the BBC flashed across headlines. Prince Philip involved in a car accident near Sandringham. No serious injuries reported. I remember pausing as I read it, not because the accident sounded grave, but because of how effortlessly it was packaged. Concise, controlled, and swiftly neutralized. After more than 10 years serving on the High Council, I had witnessed countless instances of media narrative management. Still, rarely had I seen an incident handled with such surgical smoothness, so coldly efficient, as this one. Within hours, the royal family issued a short statement confirming that the Duke was stable. No additional details followed. No internal review was announced. No questions were entertained. That was the moment unease settled in. Not because I suspected a specific individual, but because the collective rush to seal the matter felt unnaturally hurried. Prince Philip lived for nearly 2 more years. He attended a handful of public engagements, though his movements had slowed. To me, he seemed different, quieter, more withdrawn. Then, in April 2021, he passed away peacefully in his sleep at Windsor. There were no reports of serious illness, no alarming medical warnings beforehand. The press framed it as a natural passing after a long and honorable life. Yet when I later reviewed his medical documentation, something felt deeply wrong. An emptiness in the record. An abrupt stillness for a man who had been mentally sharp and alert only days earlier. Shortly afterward, an unsigned piece surfaced in a political investigative journal. It cited no witnesses and leveled no explicit charges. But the level of detail was disturbingly precise. On the night of the 2019 crash, the vehicle was not operated by the prince's usual chauffeur. Prince Andrew personally drove his father back from Norfolk, a fact never made public. Local police were later instructed to bypass brake inspections. CCTV footage from the junction vanished, and no inquiry followed. The article concluded with a single line set in italics. Some collisions merely scar the bodywork. Others derail the truth entirely. When I raised this during a closed council session, several members laughed it off, branding it a flimsy conspiracy and instructing me to abandon the matter. But I couldn't comply. My conscience would not permit the truth to be quietly entombed. More importantly, I knew something they had missed. Following the prince's death, his complete medical file had been sealed, without any formal authorization from the council. And when I traced the origin of that order, the final approval bore the signature of one of Camilla's most senior aides. I began with the first name mentioned in the anonymous piece, Andrew. To the public, Prince Andrew had long been synonymous with controversy. From shadowy ties to Jeffrey Epstein to awkward, damaging interviews that further eroded the royal family's credibility. Taken on its own, his presence on the night of the accident was exactly the kind of detail that allowed suspicion to settle easily upon him. And that, I realized, was the danger. The perfect suspect is always the one people are already prepared to blame. I examined the internal schedules for January 17, 2019. One entry stood out clearly. Andrew had indeed been in Norfolk that afternoon. He had offered to collect his father himself, an act formally logged as a gesture of familial affection. Yet what unsettled me was not Andrew's involvement that day, but the way he responded after Philip's death. Andrew's grief appeared raw and unguarded. He spoke of his father with visible emotion, eyes shimmering when memories surfaced, often withdrawing to private spaces to mourn alone. Nothing about it felt concealed. He looked, in every sense, like a son genuinely shattered by loss. That forced me to question everything. Was the grief an act carefully performed? Or was it real? And if it was real, then who stood behind the events, assuming Andrew was not responsible? Someone he trusted, or at least did not resist. Someone capable of moving unseen, leaving no fingerprints behind. Someone who exercised control without ever stepping into the light. Someone I had not yet identified. That was when my thoughts returned to the sealed medical records. And with that realization came another name, a name no one had openly considered, yet one that had behaved as though under quiet threat. Camilla. After Philip's death, Camilla's presence in the media noticeably intensified. Headlines painted her as Charles's calm refuge, the unwavering queenly presence, the still center amid political unrest. She was framed as the stabilizing force within the royal household, the keeper of internal harmony. But I noticed what others missed, the patterns beneath the praise. Just 2 weeks after Philip's passing, Windsor's on-call medical rota was quietly replaced in the internal system. Camilla's chief communications officer approved and finalized Philip's last medical report. A longtime aide to Philip, formerly the head of his personal security detail, was abruptly reassigned without explanation shortly after the anonymous article surfaced. Even so, fragments were not enough. I could not accuse Camilla based on coincidence alone. What I needed was something irrefutable, a sequence of facts that formed an unbreakable chain. That was when I sought out a retired secretary, someone who had worked in the Royal Communications Office at the time of the accident. We met in a small cafe in Bath. During our first conversation, he offered just one sentence. There were things we were told never to enter into the official system, because systems leave trails. But Camilla, she understands something else entirely, personal loyalty. Elsewhere, Camilla sat alone in her office. Gentle daylight filtered across the old oak desk, the room wrapped in near silence except for the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. She was reading a fresh report when her aide, Sarah Rivington, stepped inside, unable to mask her unease. "Ma'am, there's something you should know," Sarah said softly, tension tightening her voice. "Someone is looking into documents connected to Prince Philip's accident." Camilla lifted her head slowly, her gaze cutting sharp and precise. She said nothing at first, simply watched Sarah, waiting. "They're accessing old investigative materials," Sarah continued, "as well as files stored in the palace's confidential archives. The access point doesn't match any known account, and we can't identify who's behind it." A flicker of alarm stirred within Camilla, but she showed none of it. Years spent navigating power had taught her how to bury emotion deep beneath composure. "Is there more?" she asked evenly, though calculation now glimmered in her eyes. "Who would want those records?" Sarah hesitated before answering. "We don't know yet, but if they keep going, they won't stop with these files." Camilla inhaled slowly, then issued her instructions in a low, measured tone. "Monitor them carefully and say nothing. Let no one know we're aware. Allow things to unfold naturally. And if it comes to it, remove the evidence." She leaned back, her gaze drifting past Sarah toward the window, where heavy clouds were beginning to gather. Camilla understood one truth above all others. Once the truth starts to surface, it cannot be halted. But she had already prepared for every possible outcome, and this time she would not allow events to slip beyond her grasp. Within the hierarchy of royal power, the most dangerous figures are rarely those crowned with titles. They are the unseen ones, standing close enough to influence everything while remaining invisible. Sarah Rivington was one of those figures. She had once written society columns, then in 2014 was quietly brought inside as one of Camilla's aides. From that moment on, she vanished from public awareness, becoming the sole internal communications authority trusted to manage what were classified as sensitive matters concerning the royal family's image. I examined her movements carefully and engineered what would appear to be a coincidence. I never requested a formal meeting. I knew that if she suspected my intentions in advance, every door would close permanently. We crossed paths at a charity tea gathering, one of the rare events Camilla herself chose not to attend. Sarah stood among donors, smiling politely, her eyes darting subtly as she read faces and measured reactions. When I approached, she showed no surprise at all. She already knew who I was. "I'm aware you've been looking into the older files," she said calmly, as though she were reciting a familiar script. I didn't soften my response. "I want to ask about the order to withdraw file 74A/17 and why it was classified under the Camilla executive tier." Sarah placed her teacup down and allowed a faint smile to surface. "So you believe Prince Philip's accident wasn't merely an accident?" I said nothing. Silence answered for me. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping until it was barely louder than paper brushing paper. "If you've spent enough time inside ancient stone walls," she murmured, "you learn there are three kinds of accidents. Genuine ones, manufactured ones, and those deliberately kept quiet for a greater purpose. Prince Philip didn't die that night. He survived. And he chose to remain silent because he understood that speaking out could have destabilized the throne before it was ready for its next heir. That decision wasn't driven by fear," she added. "It was loyalty." The words left me stunned. For the first time, Sarah looked at me without the practiced composure of a handler. Her gaze belonged to someone who understood far more than most, yet had no desire for power. Only the need to keep the machinery running. "I'm not telling you to stop," she said evenly. "But you should understand this. If you continue, you won't uncover a criminal. You'll uncover a truth that an entire system has consciously chosen not to disclose." As she spoke, she slid an aged-looking file across the table toward me. I couldn't hold back the question. "Sarah, why are you doing this? You could let me uncover everything on my own. Why push me deeper into this?" She stood motionless for a moment as if my words echoed through a hollow room. Her head dipped slightly, her eyes drifting somewhere distant, lost in thoughts that seemed long buried. When she finally met my gaze again, the cold professionalism was gone. In its place was exhaustion, deep, worn, unmistakable. "Because I'm tired," she said softly. "Tired of cleaning up the mess left behind every time the royal family plays its games of power. Tired of making everything appear fine while the real decisions are made behind locked doors." She stepped closer, her eyes suddenly sharp. "I don't want to stay silent anymore. I don't want to be the one scrubbing away their stains just to preserve the illusion. I didn't help you because I believe in justice or truth. I helped because I'm sick of cleaning up after them." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "If you think I'm acting out of some noble principle, you're wrong. I simply refuse to keep serving as the backdrop for their filth. This system has already destroyed too many people. Now it's my turn. I won't stand quietly and watch it rot." Without another word, she turned away. Her expression carried no invitation for further explanation. Only the deep fatigue of someone who had spent far too long doing work no one ever acknowledges. I remained there, feeling as though everything I thought I understood about Sarah had shattered. She wasn't chasing influence or authority. She only wanted to stop being the janitor for a system she no longer believed in. Before I could respond, she was gone, as if the conversation had never occurred. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. Camilla didn't need to issue commands. She only needed people like Sarah. That night, back at home, I reopened my notes and wrote a line in my investigation journal for the first time. No longer an accident, no longer a mystery. This is the game of the wise, those who know when to let a truth die so that a system may survive. Within the hierarchy of royal power, the most dangerous figures are rarely those crowned with titles. They are the unseen ones, standing close enough to influence everything while remaining invisible. Sarah Rivington was one of those figures. She had once written society columns, then in 2014 was quietly brought inside as one of Camilla's aides. From that moment on, she vanished from public awareness, becoming the sole internal communications authority trusted to manage what were classified as sensitive matters concerning the royal family's image. I examined her movements carefully and engineered what would appear to be a coincidence. I never requested a formal meeting. I knew that if she suspected my intentions in advance, every door would close permanently. We crossed paths at a charity tea gathering, one of the rare events Camilla herself chose not to attend. Sarah stood among donors, smiling politely, her eyes darting subtly as she read faces and measured reactions. When I approached, she showed no surprise at all. She already knew who I was. "I'm aware you've been looking into the older files," she said calmly, as though she were reciting a familiar script. I didn't soften my response. I want to ask about the order to withdraw file 74A/17 and why it was classified under the Camilla executive tier. Sarah placed her teacup down and allowed a faint smile to surface. So you believe Prince Philip's accident wasn't merely an accident? I said nothing. Silence answered for me. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping until it was barely louder than paper brushing paper. If you've spent enough time inside ancient stone walls, she murmured, you learn there are 3 kinds of accidents. Genuine ones, manufactured ones, and those deliberately kept quiet for a greater purpose. Prince Philip didn't die that night. He survived. And he chose to remain silent because he understood that speaking out could have destabilized the throne before it was ready for its next heir. That decision wasn't driven by fear, she added. It was loyalty. The words left me stunned. For the first time, Sarah looked at me without the practiced composure of a handler. Her gaze belonged to someone who understood far more than most, yet had no desire for power. Only the need to keep the machinery running. I'm not telling you to stop, she said evenly. But you should understand this. If you continue, you won't uncover a criminal. You'll uncover a truth that an entire system has consciously chosen not to disclose. As she spoke, she slid an aged-looking file across the table toward me. I couldn't hold back the question. Sarah, why are you doing this? You could let me uncover everything on my own. Why push me deeper into this? She stood motionless for a moment as if my words echoed through a hollow room. Her head dipped slightly, her eyes drifting somewhere distant, lost in thoughts that seemed long buried. When she finally met my gaze again, the cold professionalism was gone. In its place was exhaustion, deep, worn, unmistakable. Because I'm tired, she said softly. Tired of cleaning up the mess left behind every time the royal family plays its games of power. Tired of making everything appear fine while the real decisions are made behind locked doors. She stepped closer, her eyes suddenly sharp. I don't want to stay silent anymore. I don't want to be the one scrubbing away their stains just to preserve the illusion. I didn't help you because I believe in justice or truth. I helped because I'm sick of cleaning up after them. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. If you think I'm acting out of some noble principle, you're wrong. I simply refuse to keep serving as the backdrop for their filth. This system has already destroyed too many people. Now it's my turn. I won't stand quietly and watch it rot. Without another word, she turned away. Her expression carried no invitation for further explanation. Only the deep fatigue of someone who had spent far too long doing work no one ever acknowledges. I remained there, feeling as though everything I thought I understood about Sarah had shattered. She wasn't chasing influence or authority. She only wanted to stop being the janitor for a system she no longer believed in. Before I could respond, she was gone, as if the conversation had never occurred. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. Camilla didn't need to issue commands. She only needed people like Sarah. That night, back at home, I reopened my notes and wrote a line in my investigation journal for the first time. No longer an accident, no longer a mystery. This is the game of the wise, those who know when to let a truth die so that a system may survive. I returned to the office the following morning, Sarah's words weighing heavily on my mind. She hadn't spelled anything out directly, yet she had exposed a truth I could no longer set aside. Prince Philip's crash was no longer just an unfortunate incident. Something had been deliberately concealed, and I knew I couldn't stop until I uncovered what lay beneath it. When I opened the file Sarah had passed to me, I expected a decisive clue. Instead, I found only fragments, vague documents, partial reports, and notes that seemed disconnected from the accident itself. Large portions had been wiped or locked behind encryption. What remained was a disordered collection that failed to answer the central question driving me forward. Had someone engineered all of this? Blurred photographs and unfinished paperwork could take me no further. I needed something concrete, undeniable, proof so unmistakable it would erase every doubt. A recording, perhaps. A video. I continued combing through the archives, searching for another loose thread. Then I stopped cold. The accident file, the same one I had accessed before, was gone. Not partially damaged, not incomplete, but entirely erased. A critical section of the investigation had vanished without a trace. The police unit responsible for maintaining the records offered no real explanation. They blamed a technical malfunction. I didn't believe it for a second. This wasn't a system error. This was interference. Someone had stepped in, determined to bury the truth for good. Camilla's absence, her silent movements behind the scenes, now felt unmistakable. Like the faint impressions left by a careful, practiced hand. Sarah's warning echoed in my mind. The truth is, something an entire regime has chosen not to reveal. I still hadn't uncovered the single, decisive piece of evidence, but the broader picture was coming into focus. Someone was orchestrating all of this, erasing every trail until nothing recognizable remained. I pressed on. I contacted Patrick Blackwell, and one of the few individuals still inside the system who might possess copies of records that hadn't been destroyed. When he answered, his voice was hushed, wary. "You won't find the truth," he said quietly. "But if you're determined to look for it, I can help." A few hours later, an encrypted file appeared in my inbox. Inside was material no one wanted me to see. A short video, yet one of enormous consequence. It was the very footage that had been scrubbed from the official archives. The clip showed a palace vehicle, the same one Prince Philip had occupied that night, traveling along an empty road. As it rounded a curve, the front wheel struck a pothole. A split second later, a sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, and the tire blew out violently as if punctured by an external force. The car veered out of control and slammed into a barrier. The footage lasted only seconds, but it was enough. This was no ordinary accident. My chest tightened as the realization settled in. No longer an accident. No longer an unexplained death. Something far larger was unfolding. A calculated manipulation I was only beginning to understand. And the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Camilla wasn't merely connected to it. She had engineered it, ensuring every trace vanished before it could surface. She never needed to act directly. She had people like Sarah to handle the mess. I sat there for hours, staring at the video, the files, the scattered notes spread across my desk. Every instinct urged me to expose it publicly, but reason intervened. The moment my name became attached, there would be no escape. Camilla would make sure I disappeared long before the truth ever saw daylight. So I chose a different route. I gathered everything, the grainy images, the deleted footage, copies of internal reports, even my handwritten notes from private conversations, and compressed them into a single file. Using a secure, untraceable channel, I sent the entire package anonymously to the High Council. I didn't need recognition. I only needed them to face the reality they had spent so long refusing to acknowledge. And the instant I pressed send, I knew the machinery of power had begun turning. This time, in a direction Camilla had never intended. When I woke that morning, the world felt subtly altered. It was a sensation I could almost grasp, like an unseen current shifting quietly through the air. A sliver of truth had finally broken through, yet I knew it was only a fragment of something far larger. There was no turning back now. However calculating Camilla might be, even she could not conceal everything indefinitely. When my phone rang with a call from an unidentified source inside the High Council, I immediately understood its significance. "They're convening at Sandringham," the voice said. "No official agenda has been disclosed, but Camilla, Charles, and the other principal figures will be there. You won't get another opportunity like this." This meeting would leave no trace, no recordings, no minutes, no formal record. It was in rooms like this that the most consequential royal decisions were made, quietly and without witnesses. And I knew that if I wanted to uncover something capable of changing everything, I had to be present. That afternoon, I entered the meeting room without announcing myself and took a position in a corner outside the direct line of sight. No one noticed me, exactly as I intended. Once the discussion began, I sensed the tension immediately, visible in the exchanged glances and guarded expressions the royals failed to hide. "We can't keep burying this," Charles said softly, his words sounding almost like an admission. "But Camilla is family. I can't simply turn against her." His statement landed heavily in the room. Conflict flickered across his face, yet no resolve followed. "You have to decide, Charles," Anne replied, her voice firm, stripped of warmth, yet edged with compassion. "It's either the family or the crown. You can't hold both." I studied Charles closely. There was no anger, only distraction, hesitation. And in that moment I understood the throne itself was the true prize in this struggle. The meeting continued for several more minutes before Camilla abruptly stood, fury radiating from her. She said nothing, simply sweeping past me as though I didn't exist. Charles remained seated, staring down at the papers before him, unwilling or unable to confront the choice in front of him. When the doors finally shut behind them, I turned to leave. At the top of the staircase, Anne was waiting. "I know what you've done," she said evenly. "And I know what you're trying to accomplish." She extended her hand, not as a threat, but almost as an invitation. "You can't do this on your own. Some things can only be undone if you move in the right direction." She paused, her gaze unwavering, filled with quiet understanding. I didn't respond immediately. I stood there, aware that even though I had uncovered part of the truth, there was still far more I didn't comprehend. Anne's words forced a painful realization upon me. My battle was not solely against Camilla. It was against the entire system, a system where every phrase, every decision was a calculated move in a game of power I had never been taught how to play. Sleep never came that night. Anne's words replayed endlessly in my mind, her steady gaze filled with resolve and quiet understanding, refusing to let me rest. I knew she was right. Camilla was not the only one operating with intent inside this family. The entire apparatus of power was aligned against me, its pieces already positioned on the board, while I remained a late arrival to a game long in motion. Still, there was no turning back. Everything I had uncovered pointed toward one final convergence, and I could not allow the truth to be sealed away. By morning, exhaustion and tension had settled deep into my body. The previous day's scenes, the murmured words, the guarded looks exchanged during the meeting, clung to my thoughts like lingering shadows. Camilla was not merely involved. She was the skilled hand guiding the entire contest. And now I had no alternative but to face the High Council itself, where the ultimate judgment would be made. I had always known this confrontation would come, but I hadn't expected it so soon. After a night without sleep, an urgent message reached me from an unidentified source. "They're ready. The High Council will convene today to issue the final decision. Everything will be settled before nightfall." I took a taxi to Sandringham. There was no time for careful preparation, but my resolve was firm. This meeting would leave no recordings, no official trail I could later rely on. It was a gathering of the most powerful figures within the royal family, and I was an unwelcome outsider. Even so, I could not afford to miss it. Upon arrival, I moved through Sandringham's sprawling grounds, where ancient stone walls seemed to guard centuries of unspoken secrets. I knew I couldn't simply enter the council chamber openly without being noticed. Yet I also understood this might be my only chance to act without immediate consequence. While attention focused on the main entrance, I slipped through a rear door, followed a dim corridor, and entered an empty room from which I could observe without drawing scrutiny. I was aware that this moment could be my one chance to alter the course of events, and equally aware it might be the last time I ever set foot within this vortex of power. What I was about to witness, or do, could reshape not only my own future, but the destiny of the royal family itself. Still, one truth remained clear: the truth cannot be buried forever. When I finally stepped into the High Council's chamber, the air felt heavy with tension and foreboding. Everyone present wielded influence: senior royals and their closest confidants. Camilla sat at the center, her gaze sharp and unreadable, betraying nothing but cold calculation. Beside her, Charles looked cornered, strain carved deeply into his features. The meeting commenced. Every glance, every subtle movement spoke volumes. I watched Charles closely, worn down, burdened. Perhaps he did not wish to do what lay ahead, but resistance no longer seemed possible. He was too exhausted to oppose Camilla. Each careful gesture confirmed what I already suspected. He was trapped between loyalty to his family and the weight, or temptation, of the crown. Charles said nothing. His hand clenched a pen tightly, his eyes fixed on the papers before him, as though refusing to face the reality that he was about to make a decision that would alter everything. The strain in the room was almost tangible. This was not merely a conflict between individuals. It was a collision of forces shaping the monarchy itself. Every decision threatened to tip the balance. Yet amid all this authority and influence, one realization became unavoidable. None of them were true winners. They were all pieces in a game set in motion by the crown long before any of them believed they had a choice. I rose to my feet. I could no longer remain silent. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me, but there was no possibility of retreat. The moment had arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady as it cut through the still air. "Have you ever asked yourselves whether this truth is truly worth shielding? The royal family, your family, do you really wish to keep burying secrets that have embedded themselves at the very heart of who you are? Behind every decision, behind every silence, there are people who have already paid an unbearable price." Camilla turned sharply, her gaze cold and piercing, as though she meant to see straight through me. I did not look away. "What do we gain by remaining silent?" I continued. "We deny everything that has happened for one purpose only: to protect the throne. But can a throne truly endure when all of us know its foundations rest on deception?" I paused, allowing the weight of my words to settle over the room. I'm not here to pass judgment. I am here to ask one question. Is the truth you are concealing truly worth saving? The silence that followed felt like a storm suspended just before breaking. Everyone understood that, regardless of rank or position, the outcome would touch them all. A choice lay before them: continue hiding the truth to preserve the throne and the family, or confront it and accept the consequences that would follow. At last, Anne, who had remained silent throughout, stood. When she met my eyes, there was recognition and resolve in her gaze. "We cannot undo what has already happened," she said, her voice quiet, yet unwavering. "But we can decide how we face it. We can stay silent, or we can choose how the future is shaped. And I do not believe we can live forever beneath the shadow of our own mistakes." She turned toward Camilla and Charles, her look carrying a restrained warning. "This system must change. The truth cannot be hidden indefinitely." Camilla did not respond at once, but I knew she had heard every word. She understood that this was no longer a struggle between her and me alone. It was a confrontation over the very principles the royal family had long set aside. Finally, Charles spoke. "We cannot continue to conceal this truth," he said, his voice heavy with strain. "Camilla is my family, but I cannot stand by and watch everything collapse because of one grave error." His words thickened the atmosphere. Conflict was etched clearly across his face. Yet he could not simply discard his queen. Even knowing that her presence had become a blemish, the family could no longer erase. "The public must hear the truth," he went on, "but it must come from someone of unquestioned integrity, someone the people trust. And that responsibility will be yours. And everyone here must understand. This will change everything." Then, with a long exhale that seemed to carry the weight of years, he added, "Escort the Queen back to her chambers and ensure she remains there to rest." For Charles, it was perhaps the harshest directive he had ever issued to Camilla since the beginning of their union. When the meeting concluded, I stepped outside. Before I could leave the area, I noticed Anne standing in the corridor, almost spectral, unnoticed by those passing by. She said nothing, only looked at me with an expression that was cold and unreadable. The council offered no words, but I could feel the shift in the air. This was not the triumph of any single individual. It was the awakening of the system itself. In that instant, I understood this was no longer merely an investigation. It was a confrontation with the very structure of power, one I had yet to fully grasp. Camilla, Anne, Charles, each played a role in the game. But which of them truly held control? As I left, exhaustion and tension closed in around me, yet I knew the battle was far from finished. Still, for this day at least, the truth had been spoken. Back in my room, I opened my notebook and wrote the final line of the day. Only when I understand this system can I hope to change it. And this fight is far from over. I arrived earlier than usual the next morning, only to find the area outside Buckingham Palace already crowded with journalists. Some stood in tight circles, speaking in hushed urgency. Others clutched phones, relaying updates. A few spoke openly, unable to contain their anticipation. They're about to announce something that could change the country. Anne's address from the previous day was no longer viewed as merely a princess's remarks. It had become a national moment. International outlets reproduced her words in full. Headlines described the speech as explosive, historic, and without precedent. Though she had made no direct accusation, her confirmation that data surrounding Prince Philip's death had been interfered with was enough to send shockwaves through political and royal circles alike. The government could not remain silent. Within 36 hours, an emergency cabinet session was called. An opposition MP publicly demanded an independent inquiry. The central question had shifted, no longer what happened, but who knew and why they chose silence. I remember seeing Camilla leave the palace through a rear entrance. No cameras, no aides, only her private driver. William was nowhere in sight. Charles issued no statement. Yet I knew he was grappling with a question only he could answer. If his reign rested on a legacy built around concealed truths, was the throne still a symbol of authority or merely a chair upheld by decaying drapery? Beyond the palace gates, the public response fractured. Some wrote letters praising Anne, calling her the last moral anchor of the family. Others condemned her as a traitor who had failed to protect royal unity. But most people said nothing at all. I saw it in their faces. Quiet stares fixed on the palace, as though they were waiting for a second fracture to appear. One reaction, however, stood apart. A wave of anger surged, not toward Anne, but toward Camilla. Social media ignited with labels: Queen of Shadows, Stepmother of Power, Distorter of Truth, even the woman who bent the crown to her will. Old clips from her public appearances were resurfaced and scrutinized anew. Moments when she deflected questions about Prince Philip, spoke of unity while avoiding the camera's lens. Every minor gesture was reinterpreted as evidence of deception. A well-known blogger published a 4,000-word exposé dissecting her connections to individuals named in the covert investigation. The article argued that even if she had never acted directly, she had commanded, encouraged, and, most damaging of all, wielded her position as soft power to silence those who should have spoken. The Guardian ran an editorial titled, "The Crown is no longer a symbol of virtue." It sharply criticized Camilla for allegedly orchestrating the events that led to Prince Philip's death. A man rumored to have clashed with her, even behind palace walls. Letters flooded the Privy Council, demanding clarity about the Queen Consort's role. One message captured the public mood plainly. The country would not accept a monarch who not only intruded into another family, but who presumed the authority to decide another person's fate. One image remains fixed in my memory. One evening at the Victoria Memorial, a place usually filled with tourists, someone had placed a small sign in the grass. The lettering was uneven, but the message was unmistakable. We do not need a queen who arranges death. In that moment, I understood. The struggle for power had spilled beyond palace walls. It had entered the streets, the public conscience. Camilla, once a master of silence, was now being dragged into the open by that very silence, judged guilty in the eyes of the people. No courtroom, no formal verdict, just disappointment left to ferment. And one curtain finally pulled aside. In the weeks that followed, Camilla vanished from public schedules. Events continued without her. The royal website quietly listed only the king's engagements and those of other family members. Once, a photographer captured her leaving a private clinic in Belgravia. Her expression drained, her eyes distant. No crowd waited. No one called her name. There was no beloved queen anymore. Only the outline of a woman who had once held immense trust and lost it entirely. I later received a brief note from someone in the palace press office. Camilla would be taking an indefinite leave for health reasons. Everyone understood what that meant. It was the gentlest way to remove her from the picture. No official condemnation was issued. None was necessary. The public had already delivered its judgment. One late afternoon, I returned to the Victoria Memorial, to the same patch of grass where I had seen that sign. The wind was alight. The sky was the same dull gray it had been on the day Anne spoke. This time, however, there was a sense of finality. Not every truth had surfaced. Not every wrongdoing had been punished by law. But the spotlight had dimmed at precisely the moment it needed to, leaving those who once hid behind power unable to step forward again, wearing a serene smile. Perhaps that was the most complete ending a nation could have, a conclusion where no one needed to declare victory, because everyone already knew who had lost. Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You might enjoy it.